Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. I'm Nick Park. I'm taking us through a set of messages on the great prayers of the Old Testament, and we're tracing through book by book through the Old Testament and seeing how God just was taking his people on a journey of prayer, teaching them to pray more effectively and in a more intimate way and to enjoy his presence. And just as that was a progression with God's people, God's work with us in our prayer lives is also a progression. None of us, when we first come to Christ, suddenly become a ready-made, straight out of the oven prayer warrior. It's a process. And as we are on this prayer journey, I pray that these lessons from the Old Testament will help you and me to increase in power and intimacy with God in prayer. Now, we've reached the book of Job. And I want to ask you, how do you pray on a really, really bad day? Now, I'm talking about a day which is really bad. I'm not just talking about the traffic's a bit busy or you got the sniffles or something like that. But I'm talking about the kind of day when you get a devastating diagnosis from a doctor. I'm talking about the kind of day when you lose somebody very close to you, or somebody very close to you betrays you, lets you down. When maybe children make a decision that cuts at your heart and you know is the wrong decision for them. And on those when you lose a job or something like that, or there's a financial disaster strikes, how do you cope on those kind of days? And Job Job had what was easily the worst day in his life. He was prosperous, he had sons and daughters, everything was going well. And in one day, everything fell apart. His cattle, his sheep, his camels were all gone, either destroyed by lightning or stolen. His sons and daughters were feasting in a house all together, and a strong wind from the desert, you think of a hurricane kind wind, came and struck the four corners of the house, and the house collapsed, and all his sons and daughters were killed in a single day. And everything that Job had and all of his hopes and dreams and investments for the future were taken away. How do you pray on a day like that? Now, it's not just that God will make things better, because there are things there that cannot be made better. Now, I know, the book of Job ends, he had more sons and daughters and everything else. But having more sons and daughters can never take away the grief and the pain for the sons and daughters that you've lost. And the bereavement and pain that Job felt at the loss of his sons and daughters, he knew that pain was going to be there for the rest of his life, no matter what happened. This was easily the worst day of his life. So how do you pray on a really, really bad day? And Job gives us a beautiful insight of how we should pray. Whenever he receives the final bit of bad news, which is about his children being killed by the wind striking the house and falling on them. Job 1 verse 20. At this, Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Now that was a traditional mark of great grief and suffering. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." And in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. On the worst day of his life, Job worshipped. That is an act, a prayer of faith, and the prayer that he prayed where he couldn't understand what was happening. It was a day of disaster, but nevertheless, he said, "May the name of the Lord be praised." There are times when we've got nothing left but worship. And this is not just some pie in the sky stuff in the Bible. This has been practiced in people's lives today. There are Christians in Ukraine who have lost everything, including loved ones. And you know what they're doing? They're worshiping. There have been Christians throughout history who have faced death. And what have they done? They've worshipped. And whenever there doesn't seem to be any words to pray or anything else left to ask for that's going to fix a situation, we can still worship. And actually, that's one of the most powerful forms of prayer that we can ever engage in. Because when we worship in the face of darkness and devastation, God can move in a way that nobody else can. This has been my testimony. In the worst day of my life, I worshipped God. It didn't make everything better overnight. I got up the next morning and everything was still dreadful. But I want to tell you that God moved, and God moved in my life, and God has been moving in my life ever since that day. So I would encourage you today, even if you're having a really bad day, and hopefully nobody listening to this is having the worst day of their life, but even if you're having a really bad day today, worship God and say, blessed be the name of the Lord. May God bless you in Jesus' name, and join us again next time for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.